Due diligence can make or break a multifamily deal. The problem is many investors rush through this stage or don't know what to look for, leading to surprise expenses, legal liabilities, or even overpaying for a deal that just doesn't make financial sense anymore. Today, we're going to be breaking down exactly what to do during due diligence, how to catch red flags early, and how to walk away from a bad deal if necessary. John, great to be here.
Yeah, Mark, so excited. This is one of my favorite topics to talk about because what it relates back to is like systems and process. And it's one of those things that I think it's easy, it's kind of the E-Myth, right? The wonderful book E-Myth and E-Myth Revisited that we've both read and talked about. But that entrepreneurial challenge sometimes to slow down and actually put those systems and process in place, get those thoughts out of your brain and get them written down. And so, I think about, us, right? When we started Ferris Capital Partners, one of the first things we did was develop our due diligence checklist, which is now just shy of 200 plus items, right? So it's like I said, one of my favorite talks about. I love systems, I love process, just makes your life easier. Less decision making when you have a process,
Yeah.
right?
Well, that's what makes our partnership so solid is I'm more of a visionary, more big picture, like let's go, let's, more of an we'll say optimistic viewpoints on things. Yeah, we can make this work. And, I've learned through the years of, we'll say, not getting it right all the time, that there needs to be an element of, we'll say, discernment, or we'll just say, being a pessimist is
Maybe
not the right
pragmatist,
word.
right? Maybe pragmatist, right? A little more.
It's more being like cautiously optimistic, and it's like if it's like 49%, I'm going to be reserved, and 51%, I'm more of an optimist in general. But that's where the partnership with you has been really good, is because you are more process driven, like checklist. I'm going to make sure to follow the process, and more detail oriented, and then I'm more of kind of the visionary big picture. But then we've gone a level deeper to actually add professionals that are extremely detailed as well. And so I'm sure we'll be sprinkling that in the talk as well, some of the team members, and how important that is that you have that necessary experience.
That's it, man. It really, I would say our secret weapon is our team. When you get a group together that is like minded, shares values in terms of not only business, but let's like how they live and comport themselves. And then you find the people that have either skills that you lack
Mm,
or the experience that maybe just adds to, right.
mm,
You can do big things, and we've touched on this on a previous podcast, but not all workers, not all employees are created equal. Some can do the work of three people, right? The
mm,
three average people. So, that rock star team is, I would say, our secret to the success
mm.
we've had thus far.
Yeah, and because we have we'll say the clock is ticking when it comes down to due diligence. Generally we'll have like 30 days to get it done. And so there's no like waiting around. There's no calling people and saying, what should we do? It's like, we need to like organize, and we need to execute with like efficiency, because you don't get extra days, right? That is something that I guess you could ask for it, but the reality is that that is not good for your reputation with these brokers on these deals. It's like you've been awarded a deal, you could have been competing, or it could have been an off-market deal. The 30 days that are given to you, you need to show the broker that you are organized, you're on top of it, and that you can actually execute and get it all done in time, so that the next deal, there is, we'll just say, confidence in your ability to execute. If you don't get it right the first time, just don't expect that next deal to be awarded to you. And they have like, 100 other groups that could, basically pull that deal together, and then they have mud on their face because you didn't execute, right?
That's right. It's like, I'm paraphrasing, but Warren Buffett said something like, "It takes a lifetime to build a reputation. It takes a minute to destroy it." Right. So, yeah, you could go ask for more due diligence, but at the end of the day, it's going to cost you probably more in some additional non-refundable earnest money, or worse, your reputation with that broker or that brokerage. So, yeah, that's the reality. I think a lot of operators that get in this business maybe miss, but all the big companies, like the big commercial real estate brokerages, generally have weekly calls where they're all getting on the phone from all over the country and they're sharing their success stories. But guess what? They're also sharing their challenges. So if you're difficult to work with or you miss timelines and make their life more difficult, every broker at that brokerage is going to hear that story. And so it just goes back to you can't miss when it comes to these broker relationships. And if you do have something that's outside your control, it's how you handle it and how you get through that, and we've said it a million times. It's, you got to be easy to work with and have the ability to close. And, part of this due diligence process is that ability to close, because if we miss something and that causes a challenge, that means we have to renegotiate or something like that, then all of a sudden we have egg on our face, as you said. So it's critical you get this part right, not only to protect your investment, but to protect your reputation within the
Mm.
industry.
Yeah, well said. So this is going to break down into really there's three parts to this. There's the property inspection. When you think of an inspection or for due diligence, you think, okay, we're gonna go and check out all the plumbing and the electrical. We're gonna go on the roofs, and so that's more of a, like the physical inspection, which is really important. We're going to talk about that. But then there's also another side of this because it's like a when we're buying these multifamily buildings, we think of them as like buying a business, right? And so, although the physical asset could be in perfect shape, the financials and the lease inspection is just as important because say if they're advertising X amount of income and expenses, and then we do a deep dive on the financials and the leases, and we have a bunch of residents in there that their income to rent ratio is off, or they're we'll just say 80%, and in we'll say the military, there's exposure there. For example, if they all got called into active service, they have to get let out of their leases. And so this is something that's the second part when it comes to the multifamily investment side of it is not only the property inspection, the second part of it is the financial and the lease inspection. And then the third part is what ties it all together. Once you go through all of that, to actually reassess and look at that and to be able to have discernment after you've done all that work to say, does the deal still make sense? Now, what helps us is the fact that we spend a lot of time thinking ahead what could come up and doing as much due diligence as possible. So once we get to the back end, it's very rare we would find anything that would be above and beyond what we had already projected. But doing a reassessment after you go through those two, we'll say inspections, the physical and then the financial audit, to be able to have discernment and make a wise decision in that moment is the third part of that as well. So those be the three main parts we're going to get into in this talk.
No, absolutely. It's much more than just getting a simple inspection done. There are a lot of things you have to review. And, you mentioned the lease audits, which I know we'll dive more into, but, we've seen deals where it's, maybe a kind of a mom and pop type owner where it's paper files and half the documentation is missing. And, that's pretty much enough for us to walk away because, at the end of the day, if we take over the property and then, find out 90% of the people are on month to month, or there's, maybe a little bit of a looser standard in terms of the residents they let in, it could really kill the deal and fast. So, it's actually one of my favorite parts of the process. Mark, you and I both spent our whole careers in real estate. So I just love being on site and looking at property and thinking about how we can improve, or, thinking about our business plan. And, so when you go in with that attitude that this is an exciting thing, you just
Mm,
want a deal, and, you're validating your thought process and your business plan, but it can be a lot of fun if you approach it that way. And I
mm.
think that's how you have to have that mindset going in. This is an opportunity to really dig in and just ensure that you're making a smart decision for your investors, for yourself, and for the future residents. So
Mm.
I really enjoy it. I love those days on site. Maybe not when it's 120 degrees in Tampa in the summer, but we dress
Yeah.
appropriately.
Yeah. Yeah. I
Yeah.
learned my lesson my first time coming.
Yeah.
I had a full suit on.
And you'll remember you made me put one on too, Mark. So I remember it vividly.
Well, professionalism, and then
I
we
know it.
made it there, and the reality is just like it just soaked through it, and we
Yeah.
thought we had a good chat after, like probably the golf shirts there,
Yeah.
they're still professional. We got our logo going, but
Yeah.
we'll just say we're not like the one off guys that the city slickers coming in that just don't get the Florida market, right? And so
That's
I
it.
learned that the hard way on that, but for me, I remember going back to the mom and pop that you'd said that a little earlier. I I remember I bought a building and the owner, I got it from the broker. The owner actually wrote down their utilities and all their expenses, and he actually did it on one page, and he actually hand wrote it all out. And I remember I get this one piece of paper and it's like, okay, so there are all the numbers for the expenses. It's like, okay, is there anything to back this up? He's like, well, no, he didn't really keep anything. Right. And so that is something when you're buying a building that's tens of millions of dollars, you want to be able to verify the data. And so if you don't, you just need to be prepared. Okay, what's the worst case scenario? And then you just go in. That's okay. It's like there's an opportunity there. You just got to, okay, what is worst case scenario? And basically, if you project for that, then, you can, in general, you can actually peel back. You can actually make it a better deal than what you initially underwrote by being conservative.
Yeah, and that's really it because that's, goes back to why I enjoy it so much because we underwrite conservatively. And on a previous episode, we touched on sort of our pre like LOI due diligence and kind of like getting to that LOI stage. So we're already doing a lot of that heavy lifting. And, we bring our construction manager, on site with our first tour whenever possible. So even before we move forward to an LOI, we've already looked under the hood. And when you get into this inspection, that's when we're really like almost pulling the engine out and really, inspecting each part, right, to make sure it's perfect. But having that as part of our process, even before we decide if this is the right deal for us, it's worth that little bit of extra expense to fly that person in and just get his expert eyes because we had a deal. Now we still ended up submitting on it, but our underwriting changed pretty significantly once he put eyes on it because he just has an eye for things that, maybe we missed, and sometimes, right, it's that idea. It's, me, you, our asset manager, our acquisition director, our construction manager, and everybody just has a different lens. So sometimes we notice things a little bit differently than maybe somebody else. And so I think that's, for us, that works really well. A lot of eyeballs on it. So we make sure we make that wise choice.
Yeah, for sure. John, just for context for the listeners, how many properties do you think that well, through the years of you getting into real estate? Because we say, we've been in real estate our whole careers, but maybe somebody's coming on for the first time listening. With your background, how many homes were you involved with that you were either, training an agent working under you, or you were a part of the actual sale itself through the years of like how many years now that you like
Yeah.
20 plus years, 20
Yeah,
years, right?
I started at
Yeah.
22 in real estate, and so I worked with a few different companies in '08. I linked up with Mark Spain and kind of created Mark Spain Real Estate over the
Yeah.
years. But going back to my start, I mean, so at Mark Spain Real Estate, 16 billion in real estate from the time I started to the time I left is what we had sold.
And transactions,
And
what is that
transaction volume.
approximately? Oh,
Gosh, I might have to get
I'm
the
putting you on the
calculator
spot
out.
here.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, so, let's just say once again, it was,
Like
16
30,000
billion.
properties?
It's something. I mean, it's big. My
Minimum.
calculator is gonna go up to billions. So,
Yeah.
yeah, it's a lot. And personally, probably sold over 2,000 homes personally, over
Yeah.
the years before I got into management and leadership. So, yeah, it's just, you see it all. And apartment buildings are no different, right? You look under the fashion, you wanna inspect the fascia board, you wanna open up every door and closet, right? Going back to that example I gave with Dom saw some things. We were looking at the units, and while we were in the unit, he just was opening up like utility doors on, like that aren't attached to the unit and noticed some water. And then he's like, that raised questions. And then we started looking deeper and realized there might be some mold issues here, and it wasn't like the super toxic stuff, but it was just this thing of like, okay, like we're going to have to spend a little bit more on, really OpEx, not the CapEx. And we'll talk about that in a later episode, the difference and nuances between those two things. But maintenance is not value added, right? It has to get done. So you have to factor that in. But often those unexpected maintenance items are the real deal killers. And so that's what we're really looking at in this property inspection is, we're literally going in every single unit. We're looking at every single lease. There's not one, centimeter of the building that we don't look at with a fine tooth comb, whether personally or with third party professionals that do this stuff for a living, right? So it's an intense process. I mean, depending on the size of the building, we might be out there for a full 2 days or more. It took Charleston portfolio is a great example. That was a full 2 day process. Largo was about a day and a half. And that's just because we have to walk through every single unit. We have to open every door, every cabinet, think about it, right? You think these cabinets are in great shape, but you failed to open up the doors, and then you open it up and you see grease stains and water stains and all this kind of stuff. And now all of a sudden you have to replace cabinets that you didn't budget for. So you've got to do every little thing in this process.
For sure. So, yeah, we'll dive into those details as well. Like, there's lots there. And John, I think our challenge this time is going to be keeping it under 60 minutes, which we will be sure to do.
Yeah, yeah,
But
yeah.
the reason I asked that earlier about the context with the amount of properties is, I mean, we've been involved in over 13,000 sales, and so well over 10,000 inspections. And the thing is that's really interesting is that all that experience, it gives you an extra eye. Like when we walk into a home now, I know John, you're the same. It's just like you see the house different. You're just
Mm,
looking naturally, right? And you can start to see, the grading, because we've been in situations where a house was bought and the grading wasn't good, and then you all of a sudden you have water problems, right? And
oh
so,
yeah.
that's just an example. But the reality is that we've figured out that all issues that come up in an inspection. Okay, there's very few exceptions to the rule here, and I'm going to share just a quick story on what could be an exception. But in general, everything is fixable. Okay, it's just how much money is it going to be to fix?
Hmm.
Now, some things can get big, and quick story here before we get in here, John, is that so my dad growing up on the farm, he actually had an excavating company, and so what was interesting is that there was a gas station that there was a leak nearby. It was actually a neighboring property, and it leaked, and the gas had actually when they were pulling out all the soil when it was being cleaned up the property. What ended up happening was the gasoline actually spread, and it went all the way to the neighboring property and went under their in-ground pool.
Oh wow. Gee.
And so what ended up happening was the all that soil needed to be dug up. The entire pool needed to be dug up.
Oh,
And then it got near the house there as well. And they had to start digging down. And so this one leak was like hundreds of thousands of dollars. And you can get into millions and millions of dollars. So those are certain one-off scenarios that you need to be able to factor in. Now, ultimately, money will fix it. It's just how much money will it take? And then you got some solid foundation issues. Ultimately, everything can be fixed. It's just how much money. And ultimately, maybe the building needs to be bulldozed, right? But again, you build a new building and it's going to come down to how much it costs. So when we're looking at things, we're not looking at it like a fail or a pass. We're looking at buildings as in what will it take in order to move it forward to be able to get the returns for our investors? So we're thinking in dollars and cents is how we're looking at this. And I think with a lot of people, operators going in, it's just, oh, the roof needs to be fixed. And oh no, I'm gonna back out of the deal. For us, it's just like, does the deal still make sense if we have to replace the roof? And then is there another option to be able to get that roof fixed rather than it coming out of our pocket? Can we have a credit? Will the seller look after it? Maybe, they can give us longer closing date and then we're able to save X amount of dollars because we want that longer closing date and then that's going to pay for the roof. So thinking creative and not A or B, but what's answer C, D, E, F, G in regards to able to overcome that challenge. So just some perspective going into this conversation I think is really important.
Yeah, and for us, we're very selective on any deal that we choose to pursue, and it goes back to that pre-work we've done. So when we're going in, we want the deal. And so you're right, it's about how do we solve this problem? And so far we haven't run into a problem that's unsolvable. And I think it's because of that work we do on the front end. So that's right. It's all about, creativity. And I think in life, right, it's like, how do you solve this problem? There's usually a solution for just about everything and in a way to negotiate in a fair way so everybody can win at the end. Like you said, maybe it's a credit from the seller because nobody anticipated this, right? One of our commitments when we talk to brokers is we will not retrade unless something just completely unforeseen comes up. To your point, that gas example is such a unique but It's a real example. So, walking the property, you're not going to see that, but an environmental report comes back in and there's a sinkhole somewhere that you didn't see back in the woods that could eventually impact the property. It's like, to be fair, nobody knew about it, but let's talk about it. Let's come up with a solution here. And that's what it's all about, because we're in the business of doing deals, not killing deals. I do think there are some operators that like to tie up as many properties as possible, and then in the due diligence decide whether they want to buy it. But it goes back to our reputation is paramount. We have to just be pristine with our ability to get these deals done. So it's all about getting it solved one way or another. There may come a time where something comes up and we just can't figure it out, and that's okay. But at the end of the day, we're not going to put our investors at risk, but we're always going to do what we can to make it work.
All right, to dive in here. So we have 30 days. So we had talked about this from the agreement of purchase and sale. When that is accepted, we have 30-day, the clock is starting. So at that point, we order our property condition assessment, or some people will call it a property condition report. And then we get into all of our environmental reports, and then, title report. We're making sure we have an up-to-date survey that actually shows the property line and all the structures there as well. And so the very first report when it comes to the environmental side of it is a phase one. And so this is more of a visual report. They're not going and taking soil samples at this point, but they're actually identifying, are there any potential, let's say, visual issues? Like if you're right beside a gas station and they flag that, then they may come back and say you need to do a phase two. So a phase one is more of a visual report, is how we started off.
Yeah. And just to back up, because I think this is important to note as well, that in our letter of intent, we actually asked the seller to provide copies of all the third party assessments that they received during their time of ownership. So their survey, their property condition assessment, environmental, et cetera. So we're reviewing that while we're waiting on the purchase and sale negotiation to complete. And just for context there, the LOI has all the terms outlined, and usually it's just like anything else. You get lawyers involved and they're going to spend a couple hours going back and forth. And I say a couple hours, that really looks like a few days and sometimes up to 2 weeks just for the wording to be right. Typical lawyer stuff, but it is part of our process. So we get to work immediately. And when those reports come in, often these deals, as you know, Mark, are trading every 5 to 7 years. I mean, prior to 2021, the typical multifamily deal turned every 5 to 6 years. And so it's stretching a little bit now, maybe more to an average of 7, but they often have a lot of these things. And so we don't rely on them. We get our own copies ordered, but it gives you a great sense of things you need to be aware of before you go in. So in our world, it's like we get that signed purchase and sale. Usually within a day or two, we're on the ground starting our formal due diligence process. We're ordering all those reports because they sometimes do take a few weeks. But we have a really good sense even before we spend any money of what to expect. And so that can inform, gosh, it looks like there was something going on with the plumbing. Let's get a plumber out here. And we actually do this 100% of the time. We camera all the lines, flush them out after we take ownership. But, it just those reports will give you a sense of things you need to be a little more mindful of when you do your own assessment and due diligence.
For sure. And so the other thing that's really important to note is that the lender is essentially partnering with you. Okay. So they're not like the bad guy out there that, they're just giving you money. They're like they are actually partnering with you, as in they want what's best for you as well, because your interests are aligned. And so what they actually require, they need an appraisal to make sure that the value is worth what the loan is going out on. And that's actually a good thing for you as an operator to get that validated. Now, of course, we want that to be as high as possible, right? And but in general, that will actually pencil out to what you had actually purchased it for. So in regards to value, which is great, but they require this property condition assessment, and they also require these third party reports as well. The other thing that's really important for them is insurance. Like they're not going to give you a loan unless you have verified we'll say insurance that they believe will be able to cover the property if there's anything significant. Because if, let's just say, the property were to burn down, well, and the lender has all this money loaned out, like they need to protect their asset. And you better believe that lenders, they know the good, bad, and ugly with properties and how to protect their money. Like that's one thing they do extremely well.
That's right. Yeah, it's something we've seen even where somebody has pretty okay insurance, but a hurricane comes through, and then all of a sudden they realize, they didn't negotiate loss of income or something to that effect. So all of our policies, not only are we covering the buildings, we also have loss of income. So if one of the buildings, say in a 13 unit complex, were to burn down, God forbid, we're actually going to receive some income loss from the insurance company there. And so it's really critical. But to your point, the lenders are often driving that, because at the end of the day, if something were to go wrong and they have to take this deal over, they need to know what they're getting themselves into, right? So
Mm,
they're, the interests are aligned, and the lender is an advocate. And in our experience, the lenders we work with, they do help us look around those corners. Now, partly because they're protecting their investment, that loan they're making to us. But when you develop the right partnerships, they are part of your team, and that's what we've accomplished with our
mm.
relationships thus far. Um, it's really like, so we're getting all these third parties, right? And that's super critical. But it starts really with those unit walks, right, Mark? It's like we literally show up on site. So it's our entire team. When I say our entire team, really the acquisition side. So you, me, George, our asset manager, and Joe, our acquisitions. We bring out Dom, our construction manager. And on our most recent deal, we finally had the light bulb moment. Let's bring our designer as well. And so our designer, she's an independent contractor, but fabulous. She comes in with us as well. So when we're walking the units, we're also finalizing, like, not only the capex budget but the design plan as well. And we're looking for visual clues or cues from around the area. For example, at Strawberry Station, it sits in front of a single family home community, and there's certain colors you see in the Charleston market, that are just sort of like part of the culture of the market. There's the rainbow row, where these beautifully, like, all sort of pastel colors. And so it was interesting. We were literally just kind of on the phone and chatting and walking around together. And, some people were on the phone. And long story short, we walked by and, like, that's a beautiful color. And next thing you know, that's our door color. So it just
Yeah.
ties in well with the community. But that wasn't something that would have happened had she not been on site as well. But we're really focused on not only unit condition, but we're looking at the residents as well, right? Not necessarily the people, but how they're taking care of the units. So
Mm.
if we walk through and 75% of the people seem to be smoking cigarettes in the units, like, that's something we have to dig
Yeah.
into and figure out, what can we do there. So it's beyond even just the unit condition. It's also, how are the residents taking care of the building. So you learn a lot there. And then when we're going through, our construction manager will actually measure each unit. So that way, when we're ordering supplies, we don't have to, wait a week for somebody to go out and measure the unit. We know what it is already. So that's already warehoused in our data system. So when unit 303 becomes available, we know exactly what we need to order to turn that unit as quickly as possible. So we're are also thinking about, like, 2 to 3 years from now when we're doing this process as well. So those are just little hacks as an investor or an operator, if you're listening, that you can incorporate into your due diligence process just to save yourself some time down the line.
Yeah, for sure. And what's really important for us is that we actually inspect every unit and
Every
not just
single
take
one.
their yeah, not just take their word. Yeah, 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 they're good. Or no, no, the residents just not, they're not agreeable on these 10 units to let you in. It's like that's a major red flag for us.
Yeah.
Like we actually want to see it because you could have one unit, it's just like it's a hoarder and it needs to be completely gutted. It's like,
Yeah.
okay, the reality is that we're going to be going in and renovating, but maybe there's mold, there's a number of things we just want to know. We want to be able to see it.
Yeah.
We're spending all this money on it. We want to, so going in every unit is something that's really important when we're doing our inspection.
Yeah, it was interesting growing up. I guess maybe I lived in somewhat of a bubble, but when I started selling real estate, like, literally the first house appointment I went on, Mark, was a hoarder house, like the literal first appointment. And this woman had, I mean, it was a mental illness, right? I'm not even making fun, but I mean, she had newspapers that I literally saw 1960 on one of them that stacked high, and you, like, had walkways through this collection of junk. And it breaks your heart, but you're also like, do people really live like this? And I could tell you some stories that would make, your skin crawl, some of the stuff I've seen. So here's a great example, actually. Our Charleston portfolio, we actually had a resident that lost her mind when we knocked on the door to do the unit inspection. And it actually got so out of control that we, like, looked in the door, but we said, "Okay, it's fine." Now, what we saw when we looked in the door is kids were drawing all over the walls. It was like a coloring book or whatever. And so, okay, clearly we know this is someone we're going to invite to leave the community when we take over. In fact, we actually talked to the on-site team in the cellar, and they took care of it before. But come to find out, Mark, later on that she had 7 kids in this 2-bedroom apartment. And, once again, we have empathy for people, and we got what a terrible situation, but it isn't our situation to fix. I mean, lease violation after lease violation after lease violation. In fact, the seller actually called Child Protective Services because it was so bad. But that's one example. But there's an example where, in the moment, we took a step back, and we're not like trying to get the police involved here. But that tells you something. So to your point, if an operator or a broker is trying to convince you, well, just do 25%, get a general sense. Huge red flag. Do not compromise on that. Take the time to walk every unit.
Yeah, and just, that we need to get in. It doesn't need to be this big, drama. It's just like we need to get in.
Yeah.
And, I think that's where, if it's matter of fact, then it's not like this big negotiation of this back and forth. It's just that's like our standard. We have to
Yeah,
do it.
yeah. Brokers, in my experience, the brokers will just ask, "Do you want to inspect all or just a few?" And we say all, and it's good. So we've been very fortunate there. But if I, in that scenario in the future, had somebody trying to convince me to do less, then that would be a red flag, and maybe even a negotiation play. But we might say, "Hey, we're going to take a step back unless we can get this solved." Right. So just very critical. You take the time to do that, and that goes along with the lease audits, right? So our property management team is also on site with us while we're doing these unit walks. So they have a construction team, their property manager, right? Like the woman or the man who's going to come in and run this for us, we bring out. So, they need to be able to sell it. So they need to understand the
Yeah.
community. But that lease audit, the property managers generally do that for us. And so you mentioned military concentration. We would also be looking for things like maybe affordable housing vouchers, looking at our exposure there. We're looking at, are all these people on a 1-year lease? Is there a concentration of students that somehow slipped in here where there's 9-month leases and things like that? So all those have to be taken to an account. And then we're also looking forward into, like, are we going to get like a wave of renewals like in, 2 months after we close on this deal? Because if so, we need to start planning before we close what our strategy looks like and how that is gonna work. So that whole process is also really critical. Every single file is looked at. And what we're looking for is not only, what I just mentioned, but just the suitability of the residents they've invited in, and making sure that they're doing their due diligence. Because look, fraud is a real huge issue. In fact, I live in Atlanta, inside the city of Atlanta. So I'm not talking about metro Atlanta, but inside the city of Atlanta, it leads the nation in rental fraud. Oddly enough, well, I guess not so, but also in mortgage fraud. So something's in the air in the city of Atlanta. And that's a real factor. People can go online and get like a identity theft kit and fake pay stubs and all these things. So just really verifying, because that's a lot of exposure. So if we see inaccurate or incomplete records, it's definitely a pause moment, and get with a broker and get with a seller and try to get clarity. And to your point, get creative. You can work through these things, but you might find some things. And so far we've been fortunate, but you might find some things that cause you to take a step back and walk away.
For sure. So main things we're looking for when we're there on site. So we want to scope the plumbing lines to make sure that there's not going to be any potential issues. We're actually looking for root potential issues. So like a root inspection is something we look at. If there's a big tree near a foundation, like that can mess the foundation up in a big way. So we're looking at that. The roofs are a big one. The HVACs are another one that can be very costly. So we're actually looking at those as well and how they're working. And then electrical as well. Those would be like the big kind of the big potential expenses that really could come up. And then, we want to make sure that we're bringing in our property management team, as you mentioned, John, and our construction manager, and any other specialists there that were like, yes, what, this is something that is like really important for us, and we're going to bring those specialists in during that time frame. And so, in general, when it comes down to our capital expenditures and renos, we want to get multiple bids during the DD time frame, right? And so we're going to validate what our underwriting had in there, but these hard quotes are something that we want during our due diligence time frame, right? And so you got to be organized during this 30 days. And so, what we're looking for as well, just going back to the sewer lines when we're scoping, so like cast iron underground, that's something that we know that that could be a potential issue. Poly piping, plumbing inside the walls, aluminum wiring. Generally, that's more so is 70s vintage, and the older. That's why we like 80s and newer. But those are kind of the main parts that we're looking at when we're looking at the overall building, in addition to everything we talked about.
Yeah, we bought an asset from an operator and their partnership busted up. And what caused it is they bought a 70s asset, and they did all their due diligence, but the plumbing system failed, in the first year of ownership. And it cost $1.2 million to replace, effectively killed the deal. And so I don't know the behind the scenes, but whatever happened, the $1.2 million surprise caused the partnership to break up, and they liquidated all their assets. And in a good way, they were trying to preserve as much of their investors' capital as possible, right? So sell these deals and get people their money back. But that's an example. If you don't really do, I think they did good due diligence from what I understand, but they clearly missed that. And that is something that could just absolutely wipe out a deal. So it's one of these things you can't skip any steps on. And just an additional item, it's almost like a little bonus item, but something we do and it's on our checklist is we have a property maintenance team typically already on site, the maintenance tech and the maintenance supervisor. So we're looking at the work order histories, right? So that tells the true story, right? Like what are residents complaining about? What issues are happening? And that's where, for example, you might learn that there's consistent issues with the HVAC. Now, as part of our pre LOI due diligence, we're asking about the age of all the mechanicals. So maybe we find out 40 units have been replaced, but the other 60 are original. And then we're looking at the work order history, and then we go talk to the maintenance tech, and the maintenance tech's going, "Oh yeah, all summer long, all I'm doing is fiddling with HVAC systems." So we're going to go back to our underwriting and budget in to replace some of those. And it's just that idea that like they are going to be the closest to the residents in terms of the issues. So one of our deals, it was great because radio is fantastic, but he's like, "Look, it's leaky sinks and clogged toilets and things like that." It's like, okay, that just happens, right? So but it's that idea that they're the ones dealing with the problem. So the work order history is great, but have that conversation. And also what we learned, because we actually retained a radio, he was working for the prior owner, and he continued to work for us. Is things that he was missing to be more effective at his job, right? So just the workstation that he had, and there was sort of this small little shed, so we widened it to create more space for him. So that's not really a due diligence thing. It's just more of like, how do we make our team cared for so that they take great care of our residents, right? So just one of those things, don't skip. Always have that conversation with the on-site team. Maintenance tech would be almost more important in a lot of ways than the leasing manager at that point.
Yeah. So, John, what I think we'll do here is we'll make this a two-part series
Yeah.
here. So,
Yeah.
what we'll do, guys, is we'll wrap this up. We're going to do a part two that's going to be coming out in the next episode, where we're going to be diving into the financial and lease audit and what we're actually looking for. And we'll just say some of the pitfalls that you got to watch out for. So, it's
Yeah.
going to be really solid. Make sure you come and check us out. And just really appreciate you guys listening. If you enjoyed this show, just please subscribe and share with other high net worth investors that you think will benefit from it. Thanks for tuning in to the Multifamily Investor Playbook. We love and believe in you guys. Keep dreaming and investing big.